She grabbed his arm before she could even open her eyes. And the first thing out of her mouth wasn't her name. Wasn't a cry for help. It was, "Don't let them find me." Gideon Hale had lived alone on this mountain for 8 years. He had stopped opening his door. He had stopped asking questions about strangers. He looked at this woman, face gray, lips the wrong color, fingers locked around a leather satchel like it was the only thing left worth holding. He picked her up. "They won't find you," he said. He didn't know if that was true. He said it anyway. If this story moves something in you, subscribe to this channel right now, follow every part until the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Her name came later. Everything else came first. He got her through the cabin door and onto the cot near the stove, and she was conscious the whole way barely, but conscious, which was what mattered. The kind of conscious where the body was running on nothing but stubbornness. He recognized that. He'd been that kind of conscious himself once. The kind where you didn't quit because quitting required a decision and you'd stopped having enough left to make one. "Can you hear me?" he said. "Yes," she said. Her voice was wrecked. Too many hours of cold in the throat. "I'm going to get the stove up and get you blankets. Is there anything broken? Ribs, arms, legs?" "Ankle," she said. "Left one. I don't think it's broken. I walked on it." A pause. "For a while." He looked at her face when she said that. He didn't say anything. He loaded the stove, got blankets, brought them to the cot, and turned his back without being asked. He heard the wet coat come off the sharp intake of breath when she moved wrong, the rustle of blankets being pulled. "Done," she said. He turned back. She had the blankets to her chin. The satchel was beside her on the cot. Not on the floor. Not set aside. Right next to her within one arm's reach, in a position she could grab it and run if she needed to. He filed that away and didn't comment on it. "When did you last eat?" he said. Pause. The kind that meant she was calculating how honest to be. "Yesterday morning," she said. He went to the shelf. He didn't ask more questions. He put food on dried venison, hard biscuit beans on the stovetop water for something hot. He worked quickly and without ceremony, because she didn't need ceremony right now, and he had never been a man who provided it anyway. She watched him the whole time. He could feel it, that particular quality of attention from someone who was too exhausted to pretend they weren't watching, who was studying him. The way you studied terrain, you weren't sure you could trust. "You're not going to ask me anything," she said. "Food first," he said. "Most people would have questions before—" "Most people didn't find you face down in a ditch," he said. "Eat first, talk after." A silence. Then, "My name is Rose." He glanced at her. She'd offered it without him asking. He understood what that meant, that the not demanding had made it easier to give. "Gideon," he said. She tested the sound of it quietly, like she was memorizing it. "How long have you been up here alone?" she said. "Questions go both ways," he said. "After food." That almost smile crossed her face again. Not real yet. The shadow of what real used to look like. "Fair," she said. She ate everything he put in front of her. Methodically. Carefully. The way a person ate when their body understood that food was not a guarantee and should not be wasted. He sat across from her and drank his coffee and did not rush her. When she set down the tin plate, she looked at him with eyes that were sharper than they'd been 20 minutes ago. Food did that. It woke things back up that cold, and exhaustion had shut down. "How far to the nearest town?" she said. "Harwick, 8 miles south. 2 hours in good weather." She looked at the window. Rain still hammering. "Can anyone find this cabin?" she said. There it was. Not "is there a doctor nearby?" Not "can I send word to someone?" Specifically, precisely, "can anyone find this place?" Gideon set down his cup. "It's not on any map," he said carefully. "And most people who know there's a man up here don't know exactly where." She absorbed that. What about riders? She said. Men on horseback who know how to track. The temperature in the room did not change, but something in it shifted. How many riders? He said. Her jaw tightened. At least 3 that I've seen, possibly more. Seen where? Behind me, she said. On and off for 3 weeks. I lost them near the southern pass 2 days ago, but... She stopped. Men who do that kind of work don't stay lost. Gideon was quiet for a moment. Who sent them? He said. She looked at him. This was the moment he could see her calculating it, measuring him, trying to determine if the solid ground would hold. I need to know something first, she said. Ask, he said. Why did you bring me inside? She said. Not to town, not to a doctor. Here, your home. Her eyes were direct and serious. A man who lives alone in the mountains for years doesn't bring a strange woman into his cabin at night without a reason. What's yours? He looked at her. Fair question. Deserved a fair answer. I found a person face down in a mountain road in October with no horse and no shelter, he said. Getting you to Harwick in this rain would have taken 3 hours minimum. You wouldn't have made it an hour. He held her gaze. There was no decision to make. There was only what needed to be done. She watched him for a long moment. And the questions, she said. Most men would want to know what they were taking on before they took it on. I knew what I was taking on, he said. How? Because of how you held that satchel, he said quietly. Even unconscious. Rose looked down at the satchel beside her. When she looked back up, something had shifted in her expression. The measuring was still there, but underneath it now was something that had been closed off for a long time and was considering carefully whether to open. She reached into her coat, she'd kept it over her lap, even inside he noticed, and pulled out a folded document. She set it on the table between them. Read that, she said, and then I'll tell you everything. Tja, he read it. It took 8 minutes. He was a careful reader. When he finished, he set it down and looked at it for another 30 seconds without speaking. Then he looked at her. Rose, he said. What is your full name? Rose Bennett, she said. I worked as a records clerk for the Cascade Land and Property Company out of the territorial capital for 4 years. And this document, he said, touching the edge of it, is one of 15, she said, that I copied before they locked me out of the records room. She was steady. Steady in the way of someone who had told this story to herself so many times in the dark, that the telling of it had become something she could do without falling apart. The Cascade Company has been forging land deeds for at least 6 years, falsifying survey records, bribing county officials, forcing settlers off their land legally on paper with documents that look real because they were made to look real by people who knew exactly how to make them look real. Gideon said nothing. Dozens of families, she said. Ranches, homesteads, people who built something real with their hands and had it taken from them because someone with money and connections decided they wanted it. Her voice stayed even, but he could hear what was underneath it, the particular controlled fury of someone who had been that angry for a long time and had learned to carry it without letting it carry them. When I found the first discrepancy, I thought it was a mistake. When I found the third, I knew it wasn't. When I went to my supervisor. She stopped. 48 hours later, I had no job, no home, no money, and a story going around every office in the territory that I had been stealing from the company. Who told that story? He said. The men who run the company, she said. Through intermediaries. Through the kind of people who did that kind of thing for money. A pause. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted everything I'd copied. The documents are the only proof that what they did happened. Without them, there's nothing, just the official records which they control. He looked at the document on the table. He read one specific line again. A name in the 3rd column. He went very still. Rose, he said. His voice had changed. She heard it, he could tell from the way she straightened slightly. What? She said. He pointed to the name. This man, Harlan Voss, county official listed here as receiving payments in 1880 and 1881. Yes, she said. I know that name, Gideon said. She said nothing. Waiting. 8 years ago, he said, I was a mountain guide. I took a group of investors through the Bitterroot Pass in a storm they insisted on riding into against my direct advice. 2 men died. The survivors testified at an inquest that I had ignored safety warnings, the opposite of what happened. He said it flat and factual, the way scar tissue was flat. I lost my license, my work, everything I'd built. Harlan Voss was the county official who oversaw that inquest and confirmed the survivors' account as credible. Rose had gone completely still. The investors, she said carefully. Their names. He told her 2 of them. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, they were the eyes of someone who had just watched 2 separate nightmares confirm each other. Those men, she said, are listed in the documents I'm carrying as 2 of the founding partners of the land fraud conspiracy. The fire in the stove was the only sound. Gideon sat back. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the document. He looked at Rose Bennett, who had walked 5 miles on a broken trail in the rain on a bad ankle, carrying 15 documents that connected a land fraud conspiracy to the men who had taken 8 years of his life. They set up the inquest, he said. Not a question. They managed it, she said softly. The way they managed everything. A county official, they already owned a story that protected them from their own choices, and a man who told the truth about what happened, left to carry the blame. She looked at him. Gideon, I'm sorry. I didn't know when I came up this mountain that you were connected to. Don't apologize, he said. I'm not apologizing for coming, she said. I'm apologizing because this is bigger than you knew when you picked me up off that road, and you deserve to know that. He looked at her. For the first time in 8 years, something inside Ethan Gideon Hale that had been pointing at a wall turned around and pointed at something else. You had a fiancé, he said. She blinked. What? The way you said everything was taken from you, he said. You listed your job, your home, your money, your reputation. You stopped before you finished the list. A silence. Rose looked at the table. His name was Daniel, she said. He believed them, or he chose to believe them. I'm still not sure which is worse. She said it quietly. We were engaged for 2 years. When the story went out about the theft, he came to me and asked me to his face if it was true. I told him no. I showed him what I had, and he looked at the documents and looked at me and said, She stopped. He said he couldn't risk his career on my word against men like that. He chose them, Gideon said. He chose himself, she said. Which is almost the same thing. She said it without self-pity. Just truth. The way she said all of it held at a careful distance, because looking at it too closely still cost too much. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. He thought about a woman who had ridden away from him 8 years ago with an expression he'd told himself was just practicality. The expression of someone weighing costs. The expression of someone who had decided before she'd even finished deciding which way the weight was going to fall. I understand that, he said. Rose looked at him. Your guide career, she said. The woman who left. He looked at her steadily. How did you know there was a woman? Because you said you understand, she said. And you said it like someone who learned it the specific way. He almost smiled. Yes, he said. There was a woman. She made a practical decision. And you came up the mountain, Rose said. And I came up the mountain, he agreed. A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, the specific kind of silence that happened when 2 people had just recognized something in each other that they hadn't expected to recognize, and were both taking a moment with it. Then Rose said, I need to tell you the rest of it, because if you're going to help me, and I'm not asking you to, I want to be clear about that, but if you are, you need to know everything. Tell me, he said. She reached into the satchel. She pulled out 4 more documents and laid them on the table in a row. These are the names of the county officials they've paid, she said, pointing. This one is the land deeds they forged 14 separate properties all documented with before and after. This one is the payment records, amounts, dates, recipients. And this one, she placed the last one slightly apart from the others. This one is the affidavit I wrote myself. Everything I witnessed. Everything I can testify to under oath. Signed and dated the day before I ran. Gideon looked at the documents laid out in front of him. 14 families. 14 pieces of land stolen with paperwork and bribery and the absolute confidence of men who had never had anyone call them to account. "How did you get out?" he said, "when they came for you?" "I had 1 day's warning," she said. "A woman in the records office, she was kind, she took a risk for me. She told me the afternoon before they came that they were coming. I had 4 hours." She paused. "I copied everything I could. I packed 1 bag. I took the company's own horse from the stable because they'd already frozen my wages, and I decided they could consider it repayment." Something very briefly crossed her face, not quite humor, but the ghost of it, the memory of a moment where she'd done one small, defiant thing in the middle of losing everything. "And I rode north because north was the only direction nobody was looking. Into the mountains," Gideon said. "Into the mountains," she said. "I didn't have a specific plan. I had a direction and documents and the understanding that the longer I kept moving, the longer they couldn't catch me." She looked at him. "The wagon wheel broke yesterday morning. The horse spooked when I couldn't free it fast enough and bolted. I walked from the pass road." 5 miles, he said. 5 miles, she agreed. "On that ankle." "On that ankle." He looked at her. She looked back at him with those direct river-dark eyes that had been assessing him since she woke up and were still assessing him now. Not because she didn't trust him, he thought, but because trusting someone was a skill she'd had systematically dismantled over the last several weeks, and she was in the process of rebuilding it from scratch, one careful piece at a time. "What do you need?" he said. "Right now," she said. "Time. To rest, to think, to go through everything I have and figure out what order the evidence needs to be presented in if we ever get it in front of someone who can actually use it." She held his gaze. "And someone who won't turn me in for whatever they're offering." "What are they offering?" he said. "I don't know exactly," she said. "But men like this don't offer small amounts for things they want badly." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "Listen to me," he said. She listened. "I have been on this mountain for 8 years because I told the truth, and nobody chose to hear it," he said. "Because men with money and connections decided the story that protected them was worth more than the man they had to destroy to tell it." He leaned forward slightly. "Those men are in your documents. Their names are in their own handwriting on paper you're carrying. And you walked 5 miles in the rain on a bad ankle rather than let that disappear." He held her gaze. "I am not going to turn you in. I am not going to let them find this place if I can prevent it. And when you're rested enough to think clearly, we are going to go through every document in that satchel and figure out how to put the truth in front of someone who cannot be bought, bribed, or threatened into looking away from it." Rose stared at him. She hadn't expected that. He could see it in her face, the slight shock of a person who had braced for negotiation and gotten something else entirely. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he said. "You've known me for 2 hours." "Less," he said. "Doesn't change the arithmetic." "What arithmetic?" "You have the truth," he said. "They have money and hired men and the kind of power that works until it doesn't. Those are not equal things." He picked up the first document from the table and held it up. "This is the difference. Paper and ink and every name they tried to keep out of the record. That's what changes it." Rose looked at the document in his hand. Her jaw tightened. "My fiancé said the same kind of thing," she said quietly. "That truth would be enough. Before he decided it wasn't." "I'm not your fiancé," Gideon said. "No," she agreed. "You're a man who found me in a ditch and took me home without asking questions, which is either the most honest thing anyone's done for me in months or what he said." She looked at him. Or you're better at this than the men who sent those riders, she said. And I'm sitting in your cabin with every piece of evidence I have. The fire crackled. Gideon looked at her steadily. You're right to think that, he said. You should keep thinking it. Stopping thinking it would be the actual mistake. He set the document back on the table. But while you're thinking it, look at this cabin. Look at what's here. No telegraph line. No connection to any town official. No reason in the world for me to have spent 8 years alone on a mountain if I was the kind of man who worked for people like them. Rose looked at the room. She looked at him. She looked at the documents between them. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached back into the satchel. She pulled out the remaining documents, all of them one by one, and laid them on the table. 14 properties, she said. 41 names. And a county official you already know. She looked up. Where do you want to start? The beginning, he said. The beginning is ugly, she said. The truth usually is, he said. She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she picked up the first document. She began. Outside, neither of them saw it yet, but on the north trail where the rain had finally stopped, 2 men in dark coats crouched beside the abandoned wagon at the mountain pass. One of them pressed his hand into the mud beside the wheel. Fresh boot prints. Small. Heading up. He looked at his partner. His partner looked at the mountain. They didn't need to say anything. They both knew what the prints meant, and they both knew what they'd been paid to do when they found them. One of them reached back and checked that the rifle across his saddle was loaded. Then they started walking uphill, into the dark, toward the only light visible anywhere on the mountain. They started walking uphill into the dark, and inside the cabin, neither Gideon nor Rose knew they were coming, because Rose was still talking, and Gideon was still listening, and for the first time in longer than either of them could clearly remember, neither of them was alone with the worst thing they knew. She walked him through every document. Not quickly, carefully, the way she'd been trained to handle records, the way a person handled things that mattered and couldn't be replaced. She identified each name, explained each connection, traced each forged deed back to the original legitimate claim, and forward to the family that had lost it. She did it with the precision of someone who had spent 4 years learning exactly how official documents were supposed to look, and therefore knew precisely where these ones had been altered to look like something they weren't. Gideon asked 2 questions the entire time. The first was, how did they forge the survey records without someone noticing? They used real surveyors, she said. Men who'd done legitimate work for years. They didn't forge the surveys themselves, they paid the surveyors to file amended measurements. Small adjustments. A boundary line moved 40 feet here, 100 feet there. Nothing that looked dramatic on paper. Enough that the property lines shifted to include water access or mineral rights or the best grazing land. She looked at him. It was patient work. Years of it. That's what made it hard to see. The second question was, how many of the families know what happened to them? She was quiet for a moment. Most of them think they lost their land legally, she said. They were shown documents, real-looking documents. They were told by county officials that the surveys showed what the surveys showed. They didn't have lawyers. They didn't have the money for lawyers. And by the time they understood something was wrong, she stopped. The land was already sold to someone else. Gideon looked at the table covered in documents. He looked at his hands. He thought about 14 families who had built something real and had it taken from them by paperwork and the confidence of men who believed they couldn't be touched. How do we fix it? He said. Rose looked at him. She'd been waiting for that question, or rather, she hadn't let herself hope for it, but some part of her had been listening for it since she'd laid the first document on the table. We need testimony, she said. The documents prove the fraud existed, but a judge will want people, real people who can say what happened to them in their own words in a courtroom where it becomes part of the official record. She paused. The problem is that the people who were hurt are scattered. Some of them have moved on. Some of them are afraid. And some of them... She stopped. Some of them don't believe it would matter, Gideon said. Yes, she said. He understood that. He understood it in the specific way you understood something that had happened to you personally. Sleep, he said. He stood up and began stacking the documents carefully in the order she'd laid them out. We'll start again in the morning. She watched him handle the documents. You're organizing them the way I organized them, she said. You remembered the order. I was paying attention, he said. A pause. Not many people do, she said, very quietly, like she was saying it to herself as much as to him. He set the organized stack on the table, placed her empty tin cup on top of them so they wouldn't shift, and looked at her. The ankle needs elevation, he said. Don't put weight on it in the night if you can help it. I'll hear you if you need something. You don't have to? I know I don't have to, he said. Sleep rose. She looked at him for a moment, with those assessing eyes that had softened just slightly, just around the edges from what they'd been 3 hours ago. Then she lay back and pulled the blanket up, and the satchel went with her tucked against her side. He turned the lamp low. He sat at the table. He listened to the mountain and thought about 14 families and 2 dead men on a rope and 8 years of mornings that had all looked the same. Pulsa. He was at the door with a rifle in his hands before he'd fully processed why he'd stood up. Something outside. Not a sound, exactly the absence of sound. The specific quality of silence that happened when the natural noise of a mountain night stopped because something was moving through it that didn't belong there. He stood at the door and didn't open it. He waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Then footsteps. Careful ones, the kind made by a man who knew he was trying not to be heard and was doing a competent job of it. 2 sets, moving from the east side of the cabin toward the north. Gideon moved to the window without making a sound. He looked out. 2 shapes. Dark coats. Moving along the tree line, not toward the cabin door, but around it, taking in the layout, the sight lines, the exits. Not here to knock, here to understand what they were dealing with before they decided what to do about it. He stepped back from the window. He crossed to the cot in 4 silent steps. He put his hand on Rose's shoulder. She was awake instantly, the sleep of someone who hadn't been sleeping deeply, who'd been waiting for exactly this. How many? She whispered. 2 that I can see, he said just as quiet. Moving around the north side. They're not coming in yet. They're looking. She sat up. Her hand found the satchel. How did they find the wagon, he said, and the boot prints? I should have gone back to obscure them after I brought you in. That's on me. She shook her head. What do we do? He looked at her. Here was the question he'd been asking himself since the moment he'd heard the silence change outside. The answer that presented itself was not the one he'd have expected from himself 8 years ago, when he'd been younger and angrier and more reckless. But 8 years on a mountain taught you patience the way nothing else did. We don't run, he said. Not tonight. Not in the dark on a trail you don't know with an ankle that won't hold a hard pace. He held her gaze. They're not certain yet. They found the wagon and followed the trail here, but they don't know for certain you're inside. If they knew for certain, they wouldn't be circling. They'd be at the door. They'll be at the door by morning, she said. Yes, he said. Which means we have until morning. To do what? To make this position better than it is right now, he said. He moved before she could ask how. What he did over the next 2 hours was not dramatic. It was practical, which was more effective than dramatic in a situation that would be decided by small advantages adding up. He blocked the window that faced the east approach with the heaviest piece of furniture. He had a storage chest packed with winter supplies that weighed enough to make a forced entry loud and slow. He moved Rose to the floor behind the back wall, away from any angle that could be reached from the windows. He found the second rifle, the older one that had belonged to the cabin's previous owner, and that he'd kept without being sure why, checked it, loaded it, and put it within her reach. You know how to use one of these, he said. Yes, she said. Show me, he said. She checked the load, confirmed the safety, dry aimed at the far wall with a steadiness that told him she wasn't lying. "My father taught me," she said, handing it back. "He said a woman living alone in the territories had better know 3 things: how to read a contract, how to handle money, and how to shoot." "Smart man," Gideon said. "He was—" she said. Something crossed her face. "He died 4 years ago. Before all of this." She paused. "I'm glad he didn't see it." Gideon looked at her. "Is there anyone who knows where you were headed?" he said. "Anyone who would come looking for you if you didn't arrive somewhere?" She was quiet. "No," she said. One word. But it carried the full weight of what it meant. No family. Close enough. No friends left uncomplicated by what had happened. No one who hadn't either turned away or been too frightened to stay adjacent to her trouble. "All right," he said. He sat down against the wall beside her. "Then we wait until light, and we deal with what's there." "You make it sound straightforward," she said. "I make it sound manageable," he said. "Those aren't the same thing." She looked at the rifle across her knees. "If they come in," she said. "If they come in," he said, "they'll find that the man who lives here has spent 8 years learning every corner of this cabin in the dark and knows exactly how to make 2 rifles sound like 4. He said it without bluster, just fact. She looked at him. "Have you done that before?" she said. "Had occasion to practice the principle," he said. She accepted that without pushing. Outside, the 2 shapes had stopped circling. They'd settled somewhere on the north side. He could tell from the faint sound of movement going still the way the mountain's silence changed texture again, from cautious to waiting. They were waiting too. "Tell me something," Rose said quietly, not loud enough to carry through the walls. "What?" he said. "After the inquest," she said. "After everyone believed them instead of you. Was there a moment when you almost believed it yourself?" He looked at the dark. "Yes," he said. "When?" "About 18 months in," he said. "When I'd been up here long enough that the version of events everyone else believed had started to feel more real than my own memory of what happened. When you're the only one who knows the truth for long enough, you start to wonder if the only one is right or the everyone else is." He paused. "I spent about 3 months in that particular dark place." "What brought you out?" she said. "I wrote it down," he said. "Everything, in order. What the weather was doing, what I said, what they said, what happened, and when. I wrote it down and read it back to myself, and it was true. I could tell because I remembered details that nobody would invent, small things, the kind that only existed because they actually happened." He looked at her. "That's when I understood that memory was the evidence. You just had to know how to read it." Rose was quiet. "That's why you're good at the documents," she said. "That's why I know what real evidence looks like," he said. Another silence. Then Rose said, "My fiancé told me before he left that I was being stubborn, that I should consider the possibility that I'd misread what I found, and that reasonable people could look at the same records and see something different." She said it without particular emotion. The emotion had been spent on that a long time ago. "And for about a week I thought about it. I went back through everything. I checked every number, every date, every signature." "And," Gideon said, "they were still forged," she said. "The truth was still the truth." She paused. "I think that was the week I stopped loving him. Not because he didn't believe me, because he wanted me to doubt myself enough to let it go. And I couldn't." She looked at the documents in the satchel. "I couldn't let those families lose their land and carry a lie about it for the rest of my life, even if it cost everything." Gideon looked at her in the dark. "It did cost everything," he said. "Yes," she said. "And you still think it was the right choice?" he said. She looked at him directly. "Don't you?" she said. He thought about 8 years. He thought about the rope that had snapped, and the 2 men who had died, and the truth he'd carried alone up a mountain, because nobody down below wanted to hear it. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. They didn't say anything else. Outside, the two men waited in the dark. Inside, Gideon and Rose sat side by side against the wall with rifles across their knees, and the silence between them was the kind that happened when two people had stopped needing to explain themselves to each other and had arrived without planning to at something that felt like the beginning of trust. Dawn came slowly. Gray light first, then shape, then detail. Gideon was at the window before the light was strong enough to see clearly, looking out at the tree line. One shape, not two. He went cold. One man visible on the north side sitting against a tree watching the cabin, which meant the second man was somewhere else, behind the cabin, or approaching the door from an angle the window couldn't reach. He turned. Rose was already on her feet, weight carefully off the bad ankle, rifle in hand, watching his face read the situation. "What?" she said. "One visible," he said. "One isn't." Her jaw tightened. "Back?" "Maybe," he said. He crossed to her. "Stay away from the door. If anyone comes through it without knocking you—" A knock came. They both went still. 3 knocks. Deliberate. Not the hammering of a forced entry, the actual knock of a person requesting entry. Gideon and Rose looked at each other. He held up one hand. "Wait." He moved to the door. "Who's there?" he said. A pause. Then a voice, not the voice he'd expected, not the flat professional tone of a hired man doing his job. A voice that was ragged and out of breath and had the particular quality of someone who had been moving fast for a long time on not enough reserves. "Name's Caleb Marsh," the voice said. "I'm a rider out of Harwick. I've been following those two men behind me since yesterday, and I need to talk to whoever's inside before they realize I'm here. Please." Gideon looked at Rose. Rose shook her head slightly. "I don't know him." "What do you want?" Gideon called. "To warn you," Marsh said. "They sent more than 2. 3 more are coming up the South Trail. They're going to have this place surrounded by mid-morning, and they've been told—" A pause, an exhale. "They've been told that whoever is sheltering the woman should be dealt with along with her. Those are the exact words I heard. Dealt with. I don't work for men who give orders like that, so I rode ahead." The fire popped in the stove. Gideon looked at Rose. She was looking at the door with an expression that was doing several things at once, calculating, weighing, searching for the trap in it. "Why should I open this door?" Gideon said. "Because I know another way down this mountain," Marsh said. "One that doesn't go past the South Trail or the Pass Road. I've ridden it. I can get you both to Harwick before they finish closing the circle." Another pause. "I don't know what she's carrying, and I don't need to know. I just know that men who use the phrase 'dealt with' for a woman running alone aren't men I want to be associated with. And I've got maybe 10 minutes before the one watching the north tree line figures out I'm here." Gideon stepped back from the door. He looked at Rose. She looked at him. This was the decision, not the one from last night, which had been simple help or don't help, shelter or walk away. This was the more complicated one: trust a stranger's word with their lives, or hold their position and take their chances with 5 men. 5 men. He was good on this mountain. He knew every trail and sightline and covered approach. But 5 men surrounding positions, and Rose with an ankle that couldn't run. Those were numbers that didn't work in their favor, no matter how he arranged them. "How do I know you rode ahead to help and not to flush us out?" he said through the door. A pause. "You don't," Marsh said. "That's the honest answer. You can't know. You can only decide." Another pause. "But I'd decide fast because the man on the north side just stood up." Gideon made the call. He unbolted the door. Wyatt. Caleb Marsh was 23 years old and looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days, which he hadn't. He was lean and trail dusty, and his horse, visible just around the cabin's east corner, was breathing hard from a long push. He came inside, and his eyes went immediately to Rose and then to the rifle she was holding, and he put both hands up without being asked. "I'm not armed," he said. "I left my gun on my horse on purpose. Figured it would help you believe me." Rose looked at him hard. "You said you heard them say 'dealt with,'" she said. "Where, when?" "Last night," he said. "At the camp they made on the South Trail." I'd been riding parallel to them since Harwick. I knew they were following a woman, and I knew who'd sent them, and I didn't like it. When I heard what the orders actually were, he shook his head. There's following someone, and there's something else entirely. Who sent them? Rose said. Marsh looked at her. Man named Carlyle, he said. Operations director for the Cascade Land and Property Company. Rose's expression didn't change, but her hand on the rifle went white at the knuckle. You know that name? Gideon said to her. He's in the documents, she said. Her voice was very controlled. Second column, third name down. He's the one who coordinated the payments to the county officials. She looked at Marsh. How do you know Carlyle? I used to ride for him, Marsh said. Legitimate work courier runs supply routes. 6 months ago, I started noticing what some of the documents I was carrying actually said. I stopped taking his jobs. He paused. When he sent out the call for riders to find a woman who'd run with company records, I knew what kind of job that was. I also knew the men he hired for it. He looked at Rose steadily. They're not the kind who bring people back for a conversation. The cabin was very quiet. Rose set the rifle down on the table. She looked at Gideon, and in that look was everything she couldn't say out loud with Marsh in the room. The acknowledgement that this had just become real in a way that was different from last night. That the phrase dealt with carried the full weight of what it meant. That the time for organizing documents and planning careful legal strategies was now compressed into a window of minutes rather than days. The other trail, Gideon said to Marsh. How long to Harwick? 4 hours at a steady pace, Marsh said. Longer if her ankle is bad. It's manageable, Rose said immediately. Both men looked at her. It's manageable, she said again, firmer. I walked 5 miles on it 2 days ago. I can manage 4 hours with a proper pace. Gideon looked at her for a moment. He believed her, not because the ankle wasn't bad. It was, but because he'd seen what she'd already done on it, and because Rose Bennett was not a woman who overstated her own capacity. If she said manageable, she'd already done the calculation. The documents, he said. In the satchel, she said. She already had it strapped across her body. They never left it. My maps, he said. He crossed to the shelf, pulled 2 rolled maps, tucked them inside his coat. And we need to leave in the next 4 minutes. 3, Marsh said, looking at the window. The man outside just started moving. Gideon moved. He banked the stove fast. Hot coals didn't announce an empty cabin the way a dead one did, but he also didn't want to burn it down. He grabbed his pack from the hook, the one that was always half ready because 8 years on a mountain taught you to keep things half ready. He looked once at the room he'd lived in, alone for 8 years. He picked up the rifle. He looked at Rose. Stay between me and Marsh, he said. Tell me the moment the ankle changes from manageable to something else. I will, she said. I mean it, Rose. I'd rather slow down and arrive than push and not make it. She looked at him with those direct eyes. I know you mean it, she said. That's why I'll tell you. He held her gaze for 1 more second, then he opened the back door. They went out into the cold mountain morning, moving fast and quiet, Marsh leading Gideon at the rear. Rose in the middle, with the satchel pressed close and her jaw set against whatever the ankle was doing, and her eyes forward, always forward, because that was who Rose Bennett was. A woman who kept moving, because stopping had never been an option she was willing to take. Behind them, from the north side of the cabin, a voice called out, sharp alert, the voice of a man who had just realized something had changed. They were already in the trees. They didn't stop. They didn't look back. And Gideon Hale, who had spent 8 years going nowhere on a mountain he knew better than anyone alive, finally turned his knowledge of every trail and ridge and hidden path it contained toward something that was not endurance or survival, but something he hadn't aimed at in a very long time. A destination. The truth moving on foot through the trees with a rifle and 15 documents, and 2 people who had each spent years being the only one who knew it, finally moving toward the place where it could be heard. But the man on the north side had already started shouting. And somewhere on the south trail, 4 more riders heard him. and they turned their horses uphill. And that sound, the sound of hooves on frozen ground moving fast and with purpose, reached Gideon's ears before they'd cleared the first ridge, which told him two things simultaneously. The riders were closer than Marsh had estimated, and the window he'd calculated for getting Rose to safe ground had just collapsed by at least half. He didn't say that out loud. He said faster. Marsh picked up the pace without question. Rose matched it, and Gideon could hear what it cost her the slight change in her breathing every time the bad ankle took weight wrong. The controlled exhale that was not a complaint but was the sound a body made when it was being asked to do something it was not fully equipped to do and was doing it anyway. He moved up beside her. "Put your hand on my arm," he said. "I'm fine." "I know you're fine," he said. "Do it anyway. We move faster if you're not compensating alone." She looked at him for half a second. Then she put her hand on his arm. They moved faster. The trail Marsh was leading them on was not a trail that appeared on any map Gideon had seen, which was either a good sign, meaning Cascade's hired riders wouldn't know it, or a concerning one, meaning there was a reason it hadn't been mapped. He filed that question away and concentrated on the ground under his feet and the sound of Rose breathing beside him and the horses behind them that were getting neither closer nor farther, which meant the riders had hit terrain that slowed them but hadn't stopped them. "How far to the first switchback?" he said to Marsh. "Quarter mile," Marsh said. "Once we're past it, the trail goes into the granite section. Horses can't follow." "They'll go on foot," Rose said. "Some of them will," Marsh agreed. "The ones getting paid enough." "How much are they getting paid?" Gideon said. "More than I made in 6 months working legitimate runs for Carlisle," Marsh said, "which is part of how I knew what kind of job this was." Rose said nothing, but her grip on Gideon's arm tightened slightly, not from the ankle, he thought. From hearing a number attached to her own head. They hit the switchback at a pace that was not quite running, and not quite walking something in between that the mountains demanded of you when the situation called for speed, and the terrain called for caution, and the only option was to negotiate between them. Gideon had done it hundreds of times. Rose was managing it on a damaged ankle with a satchel of documents strapped to her body that she hadn't shifted once in 2 hours of moving. He noticed that. He didn't say anything about it. Past the switchback, the trail narrowed and the ground changed from soft earth to the flat gray granite shelves that ran through the upper sections of the Bitterroot, like the bones of the mountain showing through. Marsh hadn't lied. No horse could follow this. The rock offered no purchase for hooves, and the path between the shelves was barely wide enough for a person moving carefully. Behind them, the sound of hooves stopped. Voices. Men's voices. Too far away to make out words, but close enough to hear the tone. The clipped professional tone of people who did this kind of work and were now assessing their options. "They'll split," Gideon said. "Half stay with the horses, half go on foot around the south edge of the granite to where the trail comes out on the other side." "Can they do that?" Rose said. "If they know this mountain," he said. "If they don't, they'll waste 2 hours figuring out there's no way through and try to loop around, which puts them on the Harwick Road ahead of us instead of behind." "And if they do know the mountain," she said, "then we need to move faster than we're moving," he said. She didn't ask any more questions. She moved faster. Bam. They stopped once in the granite section behind a shelf that gave them cover and a clear sightline back the way they'd come. Marsh was checking his own bearings, comparing what he could see to something internal. The memory of riding this trail, Gideon supposed, which was a different kind of knowledge than walking it, and not always reliable. Rose sat on the flat rock and unlaced her boot. Gideon looked at her. "Don't," he said. "Once the boot comes off in this cold, getting it back on—" "I know," she said. She wasn't taking the boot off. She was tightening the lacing, pulling the ankle support tighter, wrapping the extra lace length around in a way that redistributed the pressure. She did it with quick, certain hands, and then retied it and tested her weight on it, and nodded once. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "My father used to take me on survey trips when I was young," she said. "Before I was old enough to be left home, and after he ran out of money for childcare, which happened at approximately the same time." She pulled her boot fully back on and stood. A survey team's schedule doesn't stop for a twisted ankle. He taught me to manage. Gideon looked at her. He kept doing that, looking at her and finding something new. Something that hadn't been visible before because the layer on top of it had been exhaustion or caution or the particular self-containment of a woman who had learned to take up as little space as possible in situations where taking up space had costs. "Did you enjoy the survey work?" he said. She looked at him sideways. "We're being chased by 5 hired men." "We have a 3-minute window," he said. "Answer the question." A pause. "Yes," she said. "I loved it. Reading land. Understanding how boundaries worked, what they meant, how you could tell from a document whether the person who drew it actually stood on the ground or sat in an office and guessed." She paused. "That's how I found the first discrepancy. I recognized the signature of someone who hadn't been in the field. The survey said the boundary followed the creek bed, but the notation style was from someone measuring by sight from a ridge, not someone walking the water's edge. The numbers were wrong in the specific way that numbers were wrong when you hadn't actually walked it." Gideon stared at her. "That's how you found the fraud," he said. "Not the numbers, the handwriting of the method." "The evidence of someone who hadn't done the work they claimed to do," she said. She looked at him. "Does that sound familiar?" He thought about the inquest, about a county official confirming testimony from men who hadn't been where they said they'd been when they said they'd been there. "Yes," he said. "I recognized it," she said simply, "because my father taught me the difference." Marsh came back from his bearing check. "We need to move. They've found the South Edge bypass. Someone in that group knows this mountain." Gideon stood. "How far ahead of them are we?" he said. "An hour," Marsh said. "Maybe less." "Then we don't stop again until Harwick," Gideon said. He looked at Rose. She was already standing. "Don't wait for me," she said. "I'm not waiting for you," he said. "I'm moving with you. That's different." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she moved. The first settler's homestead they passed was 3 miles outside Harwick. Gideon knew it. He'd passed it on his twice-yearly supply runs without ever stopping, the way you passed things you didn't have reason to engage with. A small operation. Cattle, some winter crops, a barn that needed work. He almost walked past it now. Rose stopped. "Wait," she said. He looked at her. She was looking at the property with an expression he couldn't immediately read. Focused, specific, the look she wore when she was connecting something in her mind. "What?" he said. "The name on that fence post," she said. "Holt. Joseph Holt." Gideon looked at the weathered name board on the gate post. "You know that name," he said. "Document 7, she said. "Third property listed. Original claim held by a man named Joseph Holt. Eastern boundary adjusted in the 1882 resurvey. Water rights effectively transferred to Cascades affiliated company in the same transaction." She looked at him. "He's one of the families. He's right here." Marsh had stopped too, looking between them. "We don't have time for 5 minutes, Rose said. "They're an hour behind us," Gideon said. 50 minutes now, Marsh said. 5 minutes, Rose said again. She was already moving toward the gate. Gideon looked at Marsh. Marsh looked back at him with the expression of a young man who had figured out very quickly that arguing with Rose Bennett was a particular kind of unproductive. 5 minutes, Gideon said. He followed her. Joseph Holt was a man in his 50s, with the hands of someone who had spent 30 years making land do what he told it to do, and the eyes of someone who had spent the last 3 of those years wondering what had gone wrong. He came to his door with the specific wariness of a man who had learned that unexpected visitors usually meant unexpected trouble. He looked at the 3 of them. "What do you want?" he said. Rose stepped forward. "My name is Rose Bennett," she said. "I worked for the Cascade Land and Property Company. I have a document in my bag with your name on it, and what it says is that you didn't lose your water rights in 1882 because the survey was accurate. You lost them because the survey was forged." Joseph Holt stared at her. "Who are you?" he said. "I told you," she said. "I'm the person who found the original records and copied them before they were destroyed. I'm the person who can prove what happened to your land." She held his gaze. "And I need 5 minutes of your time." Holt looked at Gideon. "Who's he?" he said. "The man whose career was destroyed by the same people," Rose said. "Using the same methods, 12 years ago." Another silence. Holt opened the door. 5 minutes, he said. He said, it took 12. Not because Rose was slow, because Holt was. He sat across from her at his kitchen table and listened to her lay out the document with his name on it, and he listened to her explanation of the survey methodology error, and he listened to the specific dollar amounts of the payments that had been made to the county official who'd confirmed the altered boundary line, and his face went through several things in that 12 minutes. First, disbelief. The practiced disbelief of a man who had been told before that things weren't as bad as they seemed and had learned to protect himself from hope. Then, recognition. The specific look of someone seeing a thing named that they'd been carrying without a name for years. Then, anger. Deep, slow, the kind that had been there all along and had just been given permission to surface. "I knew it was wrong," he said. His voice was very controlled. "I knew the numbers were wrong. I hired 2 men to look at the resurvey, and they both told me I was misreading it. But I grew up on that creek. I know where the water runs. I know it doesn't run where they said it runs." "It doesn't," Rose said. "The original survey from 1874 correctly places the boundary 40 feet east of where the 1882 resurvey moved it. The 1882 resurvey was conducted by a man named Porter, who received $200 from Cascade 3 weeks before he filed his results." Holt put his hand flat on the table. He left it there for a moment. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Your testimony," Rose said. "What you know, what you lost, what you saw. In writing first, and then if we can get this in front of the right judge in person." "Who's the right judge?" Holt said. "That's the part I'm still working on," she said. "The territorial judges. 3 of them are on Cascade's payroll," Holt said flatly. Rose looked at him. "You know that," she said. "There are 8 of us," Holt said. "Families who lost land in this valley over the last 6 years. We've talked. Quietly. We know which officials can be trusted and which ones can't, and the answer to your second question is almost none of them." He paused. "But there's a federal land commissioner, name of Aldrich. He came through the territory last spring on a routine inspection. He's not a territorial appointment, he's federal. Cascade's money doesn't reach that far." Rose sat back. She looked at Gideon. He looked at her. A federal commissioner. Outside the web of bought officials and managed inquests and the specific corruption that had been running through the territorial system for 6 years. "Where is Aldrich now?" Gideon said. "Portland," Holt said. "As of 6 weeks ago, I wrote to him. He wrote back." He stood up, crossed to a shelf, came back with a folded letter. He put it on the table. He said if someone came forward with documented evidence, real evidence, not just testimony, he had the authority to open a federal investigation. Rose picked up the letter. She read it. Her hands, Gideon noticed, were not entirely steady. "He said documented evidence," she said quietly. "You have that," Gideon said. 15 documents, she said. "And now a written statement from a land commissioner saying he'll act on it," Gideon said. She looked at the letter. She looked at the satchel. She looked at Holt. "Will you write the testimony?" she said. "Right now," Holt said. He was already reaching for paper. Outside, somewhere on the trail behind them, Marsh appeared in the doorway. "We need to go," he said. He looked at Gideon. "They're faster than we thought. I can see them on the upper ridge." Gideon stood. "Write fast," he said to Holt. Holt was already writing. They left with Holt's testimony folded into the satchel beside the 15 documents and Commissioner Aldrich's letter. They left with something else too. Something that didn't go into the satchel, but that was perhaps more important. A name. Joseph Holt had given them 6 other names before they walked out his door. The 7 families he'd mentioned, the ones who'd spoken quietly, who knew what had happened to them, and had been carrying it without the evidence to do anything about it. He'd told them where to find each one. "You have a map of the territory?" he'd asked Gideon. Gideon had pulled out the map from inside his coat. Holt had marked 7 points on it in 30 seconds, with a steadiness that said he'd been waiting a long time for someone to hand him a map worth marking. "Tell them Holt sent you," he'd said. "Most of them will listen." They were back on the trail with 40 minutes between them, and the riders Marsh had bought them a little time with a story about a downed tree across the switchback trail, which was not true, but was convincing enough to make 3 of the 5 riders waste 20 minutes looking for a way around an obstacle that didn't exist. 20 minutes. In the economy of the kind of running they were doing, 20 minutes was a significant amount of time. "Marsh," Gideon said as they moved. "You said you know the Harwick sheriff." "Know of him," Marsh said. "Bill Cutter. He's old. He's careful. He's not in anyone's pocket that I know of." "That's a qualified recommendation," Rose said. "It's an honest one," Marsh said. "In this territory, a man who's not in anyone's pocket is about as good as it gets." Gideon thought about that. "We don't go to the sheriff first," he said. Both of them looked at him. "We go to the telegraph office," he said. "We send a message to Commissioner Aldrich before we talk to anyone locally. If Carlisle's people are already in Harwick—" "They're not," Marsh said. "The men chasing us are the Harwick operation. Carlisle is still in the territorial capital." "How long does that last once the riders report back that we reach town?" Gideon said. Marsh was quiet. "Hours," he said. "Not days." "Then we need Aldrich in motion before Carlisle knows where we are," Rose said. She understood immediately. "A federal investigation already opened can't be quietly killed the way a local one can." "That's what I'm thinking," Gideon said. "You're thinking like someone who's dealt with men who manage situations," Rose said. "I've had practice," he said. She looked at him. "The inquest," she said. "The inquest," he confirmed. They moved in silence for a moment. The trail was easier now they'd come off the granite and back onto actual ground, the kind that didn't bruise feet through boot soles, and allowed something closer to a proper pace. Rose's breathing had steadied. The ankle was holding. He watched her without appearing to watch her the way you watched someone you were responsible for getting somewhere intact. "Gideon," she said without looking at him. "Yes," he said. "What happens after Portland?" she said. "What do you mean?" "I mean after the telegraph," she said. "After Aldrich opens the investigation, after the testimony, after—" She paused. "This doesn't end in a courtroom, and then everything goes back to normal. There is no normal to go back to. My job is gone. My name has been through the mud for 3 months in every office in the territory." She said it without self-pity, just the specific flatness of someone stating the terrain ahead of them. "Even if we win this completely, it doesn't fix everything that happened before it." Gideon thought about that for a moment. "No," he said. "It doesn't." "I'm not saying it isn't worth it," she said quickly. "I know you're not," he said. She stopped. He waited. "I've been running toward this for 3 months," she said. "Toward getting the documents somewhere they mattered. And I haven't let myself think about what was on the other side of it, because thinking about the other side of it felt like the kind of thing you didn't get to do until you'd done the thing." She paused. "I'm starting to get close enough to the thing that the other side is becoming visible." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "What do you see?" he said. She thought about it honestly. "I don't know," she said. "That's the part that's hard. I don't know what I see because I don't have a picture of what my life looks like when it's not this." She gestured herself the satchel that trailed the men behind them. "This has been my whole life for 3 months. Before that, the job was my whole life. And before the job—" She stopped. "I don't think I've ever really known what I was building toward, just what I was doing." "That's not a small thing to admit," Gideon said. "No," she said. "It isn't." He walked beside her. I spent 8 years building toward nothing, he said. Deliberately. I made the choice to have no destination, because having a destination meant caring whether I got there, and caring meant there was something left to lose. He paused. It kept me safe in a specific way, and it cost me in a different specific way. What did it cost? She said. The mornings, he said. I stopped minding them. And I stopped minding them in a way that felt like peace for the first couple of years and felt like something else for the 6 after that. She looked at him. What did it feel like? She said. Like waiting for something I'd stopped believing was coming, he said. She was quiet. They walked, and then Rose said very quietly, almost to herself, I think I've been doing the same thing, just moving instead of staying still. But the principle is the same. Keeping busy enough not to have to know what I was hoping for. Gideon looked at her. She didn't look back. But the slight shift in her face, the very small softening at the corner of her mouth told him she knew he was looking. Rose, he said. Don't, she said. Not yet. Let's get to Harwick first. I wasn't going to say anything that needed to wait, he said. She glanced at him sideways. What were you going to say? She said. That I'm glad you walked 5 miles on a bad ankle to end up in that particular ditch, he said. She stopped walking. He stopped too. She looked at him, and in her face was the most unguarded thing he'd seen there yet. Not the exhaustion, or the anger, or the controlled grief, or the careful assessment, but something underneath all of those things that had been there the whole time and was just now for the first time looking directly at him without anything in front of it. That's a very specific thing to be glad about, she said. I'm a specific person, he said. I've noticed, she said. Marsh appeared from 10 yards ahead, looking back at them with the expression of someone who had read the situation and was conflicted about interrupting it. I need you to keep moving, he said. I'm sorry. I genuinely am. But I can hear horses again. Gideon looked at Rose. She looked at him. After Harwick, she said. After Harwick, he agreed. They moved. Harwick was a town of 400 people in the specific stage of existence that frontier towns occupied when they were large enough to have most things and too small to have all of them. It had a telegraph office, which was what mattered. It had a sheriff's office. It had a general store, 2 saloons, a boarding house, and a church that doubled as a courthouse when the circuit judge came through. It also had at 11 in the morning when they came down the South Approach Trail, a considerable number of people going about their business who noticed 3 road-dusty strangers arriving on foot. One of them, a woman with a leather satchel strapped to her body and an ankle she was favoring but refusing to acknowledge. Gideon steered them to the telegraph office first as planned. The operator was a thin man in his 40s named Webb, who looked at the 3 of them over his counter with the practiced neutrality of a man who had transmitted enough messages to understand that the content of other people's emergencies was none of his business. I need to send a message to Portland, Rose said. She already had the paper in her hand. She'd written it during a 5-minute stop on the lower trail in the neat, precise script of someone who had spent 4 years as a professional records clerk. To Federal Land Commissioner Aldrich, it's urgent, and I need confirmation of receipt. Webb looked at the message. He looked at her. He looked at the satchel. This'll take about 20 minutes for confirmation, he said. Then we'll wait, Rose said. Gideon positioned himself by the window. The main street of Harwick was ordinary morning business, a supply wagon, 2 men talking by the general store, a woman with a basket moving between buildings. Nothing that looked wrong. Not yet. Marsh, Gideon said quietly. Marsh was beside him immediately. I see it, he said. At the far end of the street, a horse was tied at the saloon's post. A horse with a specific dark coat and a white left foreleg, the same horse Marsh had noted the night before at the camp on the South Trail. One of the 5 had gotten ahead of them. Gideon turned to look at Rose at the telegraph counter. She was watching Webb transmit, her hand resting on the counter, her attention on the machine like she could make it go faster by watching it. He crossed to her. One of them is already here, he said low. She didn't flinch. She didn't look around. She kept her eyes on the telegraph machine. How long? She said. For what? Before he knows we're here, she said. In a town this size, maybe 10 minutes. She looked at Webb. Can you go faster? Ma'am? Webb said, in the tone of a man who had been asked this before and found it no more helpful each subsequent time. The speed of telegraphy is not a matter of, I understand the technology, she said. I'm asking if there is anything that can be done to prioritize. Webb looked at her. Something in her face, the directness, the specific quality of a person who was not being emotional, but was being precise and urgent and completely serious, made him turn back to the machine. I can transmit the identifier first, he said. Commissioner's office priority code. They'll pick up faster on their end. Do that, she said. He did it. 11 minutes later, the machine clicked back. Webb read the return message. He looked at Rose. Commissioner Aldrich acknowledges receipt, he said. He's requesting the full document inventory by telegram, and says he'll have a federal agent in territory within 72 hours. Rose closed her eyes. For exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them. Tell him 15 documents plus sworn testimony from one property holder and more to follow, she said. Tell him the individuals responsible for the fraud are actively attempting to prevent this communication, and we need federal presence in Harwick specifically. Webb was already transmitting before she finished. Gideon turned to the window. The horse at the saloon post was gone. Marsh, he said. I know, Marsh said. He's moving, looking. How long to the sheriff? Gideon said. 2 minutes, Marsh said. If we go now. Rose, Gideon said. She was already moving toward the door. Done here, Gideon asked Webb. Confirmation is going to take another. Keep transmitting, Gideon said. He put money on the counter, more than the rate enough to cover the rest of the conversation and the man's cooperation in not mentioning 3 specific strangers to anyone who asked. Anything else that comes back, hold it for us at the sheriff's office. Webb looked at the money. He looked at them. Yes, sir, he said. They went out into Harwick's main street, and the man from the South Trail Camp was 30 yards away, coming around the corner of the general store, and he saw them at the same moment they saw him. He stopped. They stopped. 3 seconds of absolute stillness in the middle of an ordinary frontier morning. Then the man's hand moved toward his coat, and Gideon Hale stepped in front of Rose Bennett and said in a voice that carried clearly down the street and into the ears of everyone within 30 feet, including 2 townspeople. The general store owner in his doorway and a woman with a laundry basket who stopped and stared. Touch that, and you'll do it in front of every witness in this town. Think about whether that's the instruction Carlyle actually gave you. The man's hand stopped. He looked at Gideon. He looked at the people who were now watching. He looked at the satchel strapped to Rose's body. He made the calculation. He turned and walked back the way he'd come. Rose let out a breath that she'd been holding. The sheriff, she said. The sheriff, Gideon agreed. He didn't move from in front of her for another 5 seconds, in which he watched the man turn the corner and disappear, making sure the calculation held. Then he turned around. Rose was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before. You did that on purpose, she said. The witnesses. Hired men calculate risk, he said. Public violence in front of a town full of people changes the cost-benefit. You knew he'd back down. I thought he would, he said. It's different. She held his gaze. It's very different, she said. Don't make it sound less than it was. He looked at her. She was right. He'd stepped in front of her and said words he believed would work, and they had worked, but the space between believing something will work and knowing it will work was a space he had crossed on confidence rather than certainty, and she had seen that. All right, he said. It was a considered risk. Thank you, she said. Don't. I'm going to thank you, she said. You might as well let me. He almost smiled. Let's get to the sheriff, he said. They moved down the street together, Marsh on one side and Gideon on the other, and the people of Harwick watched them pass with the specific attention of a small town, registering that something significant was happening in its midst, and filing it away for the conversations that would happen that evening in every kitchen and at every table in a 400-person town, where news moved at the speed of a person walking from one end of the main street to the other. Inside the satchel against Rose's side, 15 documents and one federal commissioner's telegraph confirmation moved with her toward whatever came next. Behind them on the trail, 4 more riders were 20 minutes out and closing. Ahead of them, the sheriff's office door was closed, but the light was on inside. And Gideon Hale, who had come down this mountain for the first time in 8 years, not for supplies but for justice, reached the door and opened it without hesitating. Because some doors, once you decided to open them, you opened all the way. And you didn't look back at the mountain you'd come down from. You looked at what was ahead. And he didn't look back at the mountain he'd come down from. He looked at what was ahead, which was a sheriff's office that smelled like wood smoke and old coffee, and the particular staleness of a room where paperwork accumulated faster than anyone dealt with it. And a man behind the desk who looked up from whatever he was reading with the unhurried attention of someone who had learned over many years that the situations that walked through his door uninvited were rarely the ones he'd been expecting. Sheriff Bill Cutter was 61 years old, which showed in his face and his hands, but not in his eyes. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had been lied to enough times to have developed a reliable internal instrument for detecting it, and who had been told the truth enough times in uncomfortable circumstances to know that the truth didn't always look the way people expected it to. He looked at the 3 of them. He looked longest at Rose. "Sit down," he said. Not unkind, just direct the way a man was direct when he decided in the first 5 seconds that whatever was coming through his door was going to take more than 5 minutes, and he might as well be comfortable. Rose sat. Gideon stood. Marsh stayed by the door because Marsh had the instincts of a man who understood that in any room with a limited number of exits, being closest to one was rarely a bad idea. "Talk," Cutter said. Rose talked. She gave him the version she'd refined over the last hour of walking. Not the full document walkthrough, not yet, but the structure of it. The Cascade Land and Property Company. The forged surveys. The bought officials. The 14 families. The federal commissioner's response. The 5 hired men, one of whom had just backed down on his Main Street 10 minutes ago in front of a dozen witnesses. Cutter listened the way a good listener listened, without interrupting. Without the micro-expressions of a man mentally composing his response while the other person was still talking. He just listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The man who backed down," he said. "Dark coat gray, horse white, left foreleg." "Yes," Gideon said. "He rode in yesterday afternoon," Cutter said. "Told my deputy he was a traveling merchant. I don't get many traveling merchants who arrive without merchandise." He looked at Gideon. "You're the mountain man, Hale." Gideon looked at him. "You know me." "I know of you," Cutter said. "The inquest, 8 years ago." He paused. "I thought the verdict was wrong when I read about it. I've thought so since. A guide who'd been working the Bitterroot for 15 years doesn't lead a party into a storm he'd been warning them about for 3 days. That's not how guides work." He held Gideon's gaze. "I never said that publicly because it wasn't my jurisdiction, and I didn't have the evidence to say it with. Just an opinion." Gideon looked at the sheriff for a long moment. 8 years. 8 years, and the first person outside of himself to say out loud that the verdict was wrong was a sheriff in a town he'd never visited, reading about it in a report, thinking a private thought he'd never shared. "The men who testified against me," Gideon said carefully, "are named in the documents Miss Bennett is carrying as principals in the land fraud conspiracy." Cutter looked at Rose. "Same men," she said. "Same pattern. Manage the official record. Control what's documented. Make the paperwork say whatever you need it to say, and do it with enough authority that people stop trusting what they know and start trusting what the paper tells them." Cutter put his hands flat on his desk. He looked at the satchel. "How solid is what you have?" he said. "Solid enough that Commissioner Aldrich is sending a federal agent within 72 hours, she said. "Aldrich," Cutter said. You know him, Rose said. Met him last spring, Cutter said. He came through on an inspection. We had coffee. He paused. He struck me as a man who said what he meant. He does, Rose said. All right. Cutter stood up. He was a large man, not in an aggressive way, but in the way of someone who had simply occupied a significant amount of space for 61 years and had never thought much about it. He went to the window and looked out at the main street. The man with the gray horse is going to be sending word back to whoever sent him very shortly. When he does, we'll have a different situation than we have now. How different? Marsh said from the door. Depends on how much they decide this is worth, Cutter said. Which depends on what's in those documents. He turned and looked at Rose. I need to see them. Not all of them right now. Enough to understand what we're dealing with. Rose looked at Gideon. He gave her nothing. Kept his face neutral because this was her call, her documents, her judgment about who to trust and when. He'd told her 2 nights ago that this was her fight. He meant it. She reached into the satchel. She put 3 documents on Cutter's desk. He read them. He read them the way Gideon had read the first one 2 nights ago, carefully, completely, without pretending to have finished before he had. When he set them down, his expression had not changed in the dramatic way that expressions changed in stories. It had changed in the way real faces changed when real people processed serious information, a slight tightening around the eyes, a quality of stillness that meant the mind was moving fast, even while the body was not. Harlan Voss, he said. You know him, Rose said. Not a question. He oversees the county records office in the territorial capital, Cutter said. He has since 1878. A pause. He also testified at a land dispute 3 years ago in this valley. A family named Drummond who said their eastern boundary had been moved. Voss confirmed the official survey. The Drummonds lost. He looked at Rose. Are they in your documents? She reached in. She pulled out document 9. She found the Drummond name in 40 seconds and put her finger on it. Cutter looked at it. He looked at the window. He looked back at them. I'm going to need you to stay in this building for the next hour, he said. I'm going to need to send some messages of my own and make some arrangements. What kind of arrangements? Gideon said. The kind that make it considerably more difficult for 5 hired men to walk into my town and do whatever they've been told to do, Cutter said. He was already moving toward the back of the office. There are 3 people in Harwick I trust completely. I'm going to find them. You. He pointed at Marsh. You know the men outside. You know their faces. Yes, Marsh said. Then you're going to sit at that window and tell me the moment anything changes on my street. He looked at Rose. And you're going to write down every name in those documents that's connected to a county official in this territory. Every single one. I want a list I can hold in my hand. I already have that list, Rose said. She reached into the satchel and produced a folded piece of paper. I made it on the trail 2 hours ago. Cutter looked at the paper. He looked at her. You made this list 2 hours ago, he said, while you were walking. I had a piece of paper and a pencil and enough time, she said. It seemed productive. Cutter made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same family. All right, Miss Bennett, he said. He took the list. Let's get to work. The next 40 minutes were the tightest 40 minutes Gideon had spent in a long time, which was saying something given the previous 48 hours. Cutter moved fast for a 61-year-old man. He was back in 15 minutes with 2 men. His deputy, a younger man named Cole, who had the focused alertness of someone who'd been told something serious was happening and had immediately stopped being relaxed about anything, and an older man named Price, who ran the Harwick General Store, and who, it turned out, had served as a county commissioner for 12 years before moving out here, and who understood official documents and their authentication in a way that was going to be useful. Price sat down with Rose and the documents. What happened over the next 20 minutes at that table was the most concentrated piece of work Gideon had watched anyone do under pressure. Price asked questions in the rapid, specific language of someone who knew exactly what he was looking at, and Rose answered them in the same language and the conversation that would have been opaque to anyone without their specific combined knowledge was instead a precise, fast-moving audit of what the documents were and what they could prove. Gideon watched from across the room. He watched Rose work the way she moved through the documents without hesitation, the way she anticipated Price's next question before he asked it, the way she laid two documents side by side to show a comparison point without being asked to do so, because she'd already identified that it was the clearest way to demonstrate the forgery. He thought about a woman who had walked 5 miles on a bad ankle because stopping wasn't an option. He thought about her voice saying, "I've been doing the same thing, just moving instead of staying still." He thought about after Harwick. Marsh's voice came from the window. "Two of them just met up on the street. The Gray Horse Man and someone I didn't see before. They're talking." Gideon moved to the window. 2 men. Unhurried on the surface, but with the specific body language of people whose conversation was urgent and time-dependent. "They're deciding," Gideon said. "Deciding what?" Cole asked. "Whether what's in that building." Gideon nodded toward the table where Rose and Price were working. "Is worth the cost of coming to get it in a sheriff's office in broad daylight." Cutter came to look over his shoulder. "Let them decide," Cutter said. "While they decide, we keep working." He went back to his desk. Gideon stayed at the window. Price finished his assessment at the 23-minute mark. He sat back. He looked at Cutter. "These are genuine," he said. "The originals and the copies both. The forgery methodology and the survey alterations matches what I've seen in 2 other disputed land cases over the last decade. I never had proof before of where it originated. Now I do." He paused. "And the payment records are in the hand of a man named Carlisle, who I have signed receipts from in the Harwick County files going back 4 years. The handwriting is identical." The room was very quiet. Rose put both hands flat on the table. It was the same gesture Holt had made, hand flat on a surface weight, pressing down the physical expression of something that had been uncertain for a long time becoming certain. "Carlisle signed his own payment records," Gideon said. "Arrogance?" Rose said. "He never expected anyone to find them. When you're certain you control the system, you stop being careful about what you put in writing." She looked at Price. "You said 2 other disputed land cases. Were they in this territory?" "Both," Price said. "Different counties, same methodology. I can give you the names of the families." "Write them down," Rose said. He wrote them down. She added them to the list. The list that had started as 15 documents and 1 telegraph to Portland was becoming something larger, a connected record of a pattern that went further and deeper than even Rose had mapped in her 3 months of running. Cutter looked at the growing list. "This isn't just 14 families," he said. "No," Rose said. "It never was. 14 is what I could document from the Cascade records I had access to. The actual number is—" She stopped. "I don't know the actual number. That's why we need the federal investigation." Cutter nodded slowly. He looked at Gideon. "The inquest," he said. "If what I'm reading here is what I think it is, the connection between the investors, the county official, the managed testimony, it means the verdict was manufactured," Gideon said. "Not just wrong, deliberately manufactured by men who needed a specific outcome to protect themselves from the consequences of decisions they'd already made." He said it flat. No drama. Just the truth stated plainly in a room full of people who now had the documents to confirm it. Cutter looked at him for a long moment. 8 years, he said. 8 years, Gideon said. "I'm sorry," Cutter said. Simple, direct. The apology of a man who understood that it was inadequate and offered it anyway, because not offering it would have been worse. Gideon looked at him. "Help us finish this," he said. "That's the apology I want." Cutter held his gaze. "Count on it," he said. Marsh's voice came from the window again. "They're moving, both of them, toward us." What happened next happened fast, and then slowly. and then fast again in the specific rhythm of confrontations that had been building for a long time and then arrived all at once. The two men came to the sheriff's office door. Cutter was there before they knocked. He'd seen them coming in Marsh's face and moved to the door and opened it before they reached it, which immediately shifted the dynamic in a way that was small but significant. He was not a man receiving visitors. He was a man at the threshold of his own space, waiting. The man Gideon had faced on the street. He had a name now. Marsh had told them Decker, a man known in certain circles for doing work of this particular variety, looked at Cutter with the professional neutrality of someone who had done this before and knew how to do it in front of a badge. "Sheriff," he said, "we're looking for a woman, traveling alone. Brown hair, mid-20s, carrying a leather satchel. She's taken property belonging to our employer, and we're authorized to retrieve it." "Authorized how?" Cutter said. Decker produced a document, company letterhead, authorizing two named individuals, he named himself and his companion, to recover property on behalf of the Cascade Land and Property Company. Cutter took it. He looked at it. He handed it back. "That's a private company document," he said. "It authorizes you to do exactly nothing in my jurisdiction. If your employer believes property has been stolen, he can file a complaint with the territorial court, and a judge can issue an order. Until then, you're two men standing on my porch with a piece of paper that doesn't mean anything I'm required to act on." Decker looked at him with the flat patience of a man who had anticipated this and had a next step. "The woman is in this building," he said. "People are often in this building," Cutter said. "It's the sheriff's office. It's a public building. We'd like to speak with her." "She's not available for conversation right now," Cutter said. "She's assisting me with an official matter." Decker's companion, younger, less practiced at keeping his face neutral, glanced past Cutter's shoulder at the interior of the office. His eyes found Rose at the table. His jaw tightened. Decker noticed him looking and deliberately did not look himself, which Gideon noted from his position inside the room as the move of a man with better self-control and therefore more worth watching. "What official matter?" Decker said. "The kind that's official," Cutter said. "I'm not required to elaborate on that. Is there something else I can help you with?" A pause. Decker looked at the sheriff with the expression of a man recalculating. This was the moment Gideon had been watching for, the moment where hired men decided whether the cost of forcing the issue in broad daylight in front of a sheriff they couldn't buy was less than the cost of what was inside the building, getting out of their reach. "We'll be in town," Decker said. "Enjoy your stay," Cutter said. He closed the door. He bolted it. He turned to the room. "They're not leaving," he said. "They're going to wait and try to intercept you when you move. Or they're going to send word and wait for instructions." He crossed to his desk. "Which means we have a window. How much time do we need to finish documenting what we have here?" "An hour," Rose said. 45 minutes, Price said. Rose looked at him. 45 minutes, she agreed. "Then you have 45 minutes, Cutter said. "Cole." His deputy came to attention. "Go get the Drummond family. Tell them the sheriff needs to speak with them about the land dispute. Don't tell them anything else." He looked at Gideon. "You said Holt gave you 7 names. And 2 more from Price," Gideon said. 9 total. "In 45 minutes we can reach 3 of them from here," Cutter said. "Family's in town today or close enough. If they'll give written testimony." "They will," Gideon said. "How do you know?" Cutter said. "Because Joseph Holt wrote his in under 10 minutes, Gideon said. "A man who's been carrying something wrong for 3 years and finally has someone hand him away to set it down, he doesn't hesitate." Cutter looked at him. Then he looked at Rose. "You two," he said. It was not elaborated on, but the observation was complete. Rose looked at her documents. 45 minutes, she said. What those 45 minutes produced was a document package that was different in kind from what had existed before it. Before 15 copied records, 1 telegraph confirmation, 1 settler's testimony. After 15 copied records, telegraph confirmation, 4 settlers' testimonies from Harwick and immediate surroundings, Price's written authentication of the forgery methodology, with reference to 2 additional cases, and a sworn statement from Cutter himself, attesting to the Drummond land dispute and Voss's role in it. Rose organized it all in the order it would need to be presented, the way you organized an argument, the way her father had taught her to read a survey, beginning with the foundation and building to what the foundation supported. She tied the stack with cord from Cutter's desk. She looked at it. She looked at Gideon. "This is enough," she said quietly. "This is enough for Aldrich to open the investigation, and enough for a federal judge to move on it. This is enough." He looked at her face. She had been holding something back for 3 months, not breaking, not because she wasn't feeling the weight of it, but because she was too much in motion to let herself feel it fully. Now, for the first time, she was still, and the stillness was letting something through. "Yes," he said, "it is." She pressed her lips together. She nodded once. She put the stack into the satchel. "What now?" she said. Her voice was even. She was pulling herself back together the way she always did, fast, deliberate, forward-facing. "Now we move you somewhere defensible until the federal agent arrives," Cutter said. 72 hours. I have a location, a property outside town, a family I trust. Decker and his men won't know it." "And Carlisle," Rose said. "When Decker reports that we're in Harwick with a sheriff and documentation and a federal agent incoming, Carlisle will have a choice," Cutter said. "Run or face it." "Men like Carlisle don't run," Rose said. "Not before they've tried everything else." "What's everything else?" Marsh said. Rose looked at Gideon. He looked at her. And in the look between them was the specific communication of 2 people who had spent 3 days and 50 miles and several near disasters arriving at the same understanding of the same situation. "He'll try to get the documents," Gideon said. "Not through Decker. Decker's too visible now. He'll try something quieter, something that looks like an accident, or a legal process, or—" He stopped. "Or he'll offer a settlement," Rose said. The room went quiet. "A settlement," Cutter said. "Money," Rose said. "To me directly, for the documents and my silence. It's what he did with 2 of the original settlers, paid them enough to not pursue the land dispute and move on. Cheaper than a court case, cleaner than the alternative." She looked at Gideon. "If I were Carlisle, that's what I'd try next." "And if he does," Gideon said. She looked at him steadily. "Then he's about to learn that some things aren't for sale," she said. She stood up. She picked up the satchel. She looked at Cutter. "Let's move." The safe house was a farm 3 miles northeast of Harwick, owned by a couple named the Bergens, who had been in this valley for 20 years, and whose relationship with Cutter was the kind built over 2 decades of being decent people in proximity to a decent man. Elsa Bergen was 55, practical, and had the particular quality of a woman who absorbed extraordinary situations into ordinary life without making a production of it. She looked at the 3 strangers Cutter brought to her door at midday, assessed them in about 4 seconds, and said, "I'll put coffee on. The room off the kitchen has a bolt on the inside." Her husband Eric shook Gideon's hand with the grip of someone who had been working land for 30 years, and said, "Anything you need." 2 words. Complete sentence. Gideon understood them entirely. That evening, for the first time in 4 days, Rose sat at a table with food in front of her that she hadn't prepared under duress, and ate it slowly, without the constant background calculation of what was behind them and what was ahead. Elsa sat with her. Gideon was at the window, old habit, necessary habit, but he was listening. "You've been carrying those documents for 3 months, Elsa said. Not a question, an observation. "Yes," Rose said. "Alone," Elsa said. "Mostly," Rose said. She glanced at Gideon across the room. "Until recently." Elsa followed her gaze. She looked at Rose. She said nothing further on the subject, because some things were visible enough that pointing them out was unnecessary. "The ankle," Elsa said instead. "Let me look at it properly." Rose let her. Gideon watched Elsa examine the ankle with competent hands and a practical expression, and Rose sit through it with the particular patience of someone allowing care without being entirely comfortable receiving it. "Badly sprained," Elsa said. "Not broken, but you've been walking on it for 4 days, and it needs 2 days of elevation and cold packs, or it's going to become a real problem." "I don't have 2 days," Rose said. "You have 72 hours, Gideon said from the window. She looked at him. "Federal agent," he said. "Cutter said 72 hours. "During which we're waiting here," Rose said. "During which you rest your ankle, and I make sure nothing comes through that door," he said. She looked at him. "You're going to stand at that window for 72 hours, she said. "Not the whole time," he said. "When are you going to sleep?" "When you're awake," he said. A silence. Elsa stood up very carefully, not looking at either of them, and said she was going to get the cold pack and went into the other room. Rose looked at Gideon across the kitchen. "You said after Harwick," she said. He turned from the window. "We're past Harwick," she said. He crossed the room. He sat in the chair across from her. Not the window side, not the door side, the chair directly across from her where he could see her face and she could see his, and there was nothing between them but the small distance of a table. "Yes," he said. "I've been thinking about what you said on the trail," she said. "About mornings. About waiting for something you'd stopped believing was coming." "I remember," he said. "I think—" She stopped, started again. "I think I've been waiting too. Without knowing it, or knowing it and not letting myself name it, because naming things makes them real, and real things can be lost, and I'd already lost enough." She looked at him directly. "I'm tired of not naming things." "Then name it," he said. She held his gaze. "I don't want to leave," she said. "After this. After Aldrich and the testimony and whatever the court does. I don't want to go somewhere and start over alone." She paused. "And the reason I don't want to is sitting across from me right now." Gideon looked at her. At the woman who had walked into a ditch in his mountain and walked out of it and kept walking through his cabin and his history and his 8 years of mornings that all looked the same, through riders and ridge lines and sheriff's offices and settlers' kitchens, through everything the last 4 days had required of her, and was still sitting across from him with her eyes direct and her hands steady and saying the true thing, because she'd decided she was done not saying it. "I came down that mountain for the first time in 8 years, he said. "You know why?" "Tell me," she said. "Because you were on it," he said, "and because wherever you were going with those documents was somewhere that mattered, and because—" He paused. "Not from hesitation, from wanting to get it right. Because I looked at you in my cabin 2 nights ago, and I thought this is what a morning is supposed to feel like. When there's someone across the table, and the day ahead of you means something because of who you're spending it with." Rose looked at him. Her jaw moved slightly, the specific movement of someone holding something together that wanted to come apart. "That's a very specific thing to think," she said. "I'm a specific person," he said. She smiled. Not the almost smile, not the ghost of one. The real thing, full and present, and changing her whole face the way a real smile did when it was allowed to be what it was. "Yes," she said. "You are." Elsa returned with the cold pack, took one look at the two of them, set it on the table beside Rose's ankle, and said with complete composure, "I'll be outside if anyone needs me." And went outside. Neither Gideon nor Rose moved. "The cabin," Rose said. "When this is done, if we go back." "When?" he said. She looked at him. "When we go back," he said. "Not if." She held his gaze for a long moment. "When we go back," she said, "it won't be a place I'm staying until I figure out the next thing. It'll be home," he said. She was quiet. She looked at the word like she was trying it on, testing the weight of it, seeing if it fit. "Home," she said. Outside somewhere between Harwick and the mountain and a federal office in Portland, The truth that Rose Bennett had carried alone for 3 months was moving through official channels at the speed of a telegraph wire, and the men who had built a system on the certainty that no one person could take it apart were beginning to understand that they had miscalculated badly the specific kind of person they had sent their riders after. Inside the Bergen kitchen, 2 people who had each spent years building walls around the word home said it out loud in the same breath, and meant it, and did not take it back, which was the thing that mattered most, more than the saying of it, more than the moment itself. Because words said in relief or exhaustion, or the particular vulnerability of a hard few days, could be unsaid when the hard days were over. But these 2 people looked at each other across a kitchen table in a farmhouse outside Harwick, and neither of them reached for a qualification, or a condition, or a careful distance, and that was how you knew it was real. The 72 hours passed in a way that was both longer and shorter than either of them expected. Longer, because waiting when you had been moving for days had a particular quality of wrongness. The body still alert, still listening, still calculating exits, while the situation demanded stillness. Rose spent the first morning reorganizing the document package 3 times before she caught herself doing it and stopped. Gideon spent the first night at the window until Elsa Bergen came downstairs at 2 in the morning, handed him a cup of coffee, and said with the directness of a woman who had been running a household for 30 years, "You sleeping or not?" "Not yet," he said. "Then drink that," she said. "And know that Eric has done 2 circuits of the property and everything is quiet." He looked at her. "You've done this before," he said. "Hidden people." Elsa sat down at the kitchen table with her own cup. "Twice," she said. "Once during a land dispute that turned ugly, a family with 4 children and nowhere to go for 3 days. Once, with a man who'd testified against someone powerful and needed to disappear for a week until the circuit judge arrived." She drank her coffee. "Bill Cutter knows who to call. He's always known." Gideon looked out the window at the quiet dark. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Thank me when it's done." She stood. "Wake me in 2 hours and I'll take the window. You need to sleep, or you won't be useful to that woman when she needs you to be." He looked at her. "She can handle herself," he said. "I know she can," Elsa said. "That's not what I said. I said you need to be useful to her. Those are different things." She set her cup down. 2 hours. "Then wake me." She went back upstairs. Gideon sat at the window. He thought about useful, about what it meant to be useful to someone who didn't need to be saved, who had in fact done most of her own saving, but who might possibly want someone alongside her doing the work that she couldn't do alone. Not because she lacked capability, because some things were simply not designed for one person. He woke Elsa in 2 hours. He slept. The federal agent arrived in 68 hours, not 72. His name was Samuel Cross, and he was 40-something compact and had the specific economy of movement of a man who had spent many years making consequential decisions in a limited amount of time, and had streamlined himself down to what was necessary. He arrived with a deputy and a telegraph authorization from Commissioner Aldrich that Cutter read twice and then handed to Rose. She read it. She looked up at Cross. "You've reviewed the document summary we transmitted," she said. "I have," Cross said, and Commissioner Aldrich believes it constitutes sufficient basis for a federal investigation into the Cascade Land and Property Company and its affiliated agents," Cross said, "which is why I'm here and not still in Portland." He looked at the satchel. "I need to see the originals." She put them on the table. All 15. Cross went through them with his deputy, not fast thorough. The way Gideon had gone through the first one, the way Price had authenticated them, the way Cutter had read the 3 she'd shown him. Carefully, completely treating each page as what it was evidence. 35 minutes. When Cross finished, he sat back. He looked at Rose. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, regardless of whether you think the answer helps your case." "All right," she said. Is there anything in these documents, or in your account of how you obtained them, that a competent attorney for the defense could successfully challenge? He said. Anything you're uncertain about. Anything that could be argued as misinterpretation, coincidence, or procedural irregularity on your part. Rose was quiet for a moment. Gideon watched her think. Not calculate, think. Actually, consider the question with the same precision she brought to everything, including herself. The payment records, she said. Carlyle signed them himself, but the argument could be made that a signature on an internal document doesn't constitute proof of intent, that they could be legitimate consulting fees that were mislabeled. She paused. But the consulting agreements those fees reference don't exist in the company's own files. I checked. Twice. The money went out and there is no legitimate contract for it. She looked at Cross. That's the one they'll challenge. The rest is structural. The forgery in the surveys is either there or it isn't, and Price has already authenticated it. Cross looked at his deputy. His deputy gave a small nod that meant something the two of them had developed a shorthand for. Cross looked back at Rose. We'll need you to testify, he said. Formally, under oath, in front of a federal judge. I know, she said. It will be difficult, he said. Their attorneys will work to discredit your account, your character, your motives. Everything you've been through in the last 3 months will be examined in a courtroom. I know that too, she said. And, Cross said. Rose looked at him steadily. And 14 families lost their land, she said. And a man lost 8 years of his life. And I spent 3 months running because I wouldn't destroy the evidence of what was done to them. She held Cross's gaze. There is no version of this where I don't testify. Cross looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Gideon. You're the guide, he said, from the inquest. Yes, Gideon said. The investors named in document 3, Cross said. Whitmore and Kane. They hired me, Gideon said, in 1876. And the county official who confirmed their testimony, Voss, is named in document 11 as a paid agent of the Cascade Company going back to 1879. Cross was quiet for a moment. The inquest was 1876. Voss was already connected to Whitmore and Kane 3 years before he went on Cascade's official payroll. An informal arrangement made formal, Rose said. Yes, Cross said. Which means the inquest wasn't a coincidence. It was managed by men who already had a working relationship with the official who oversaw it. He looked at Gideon. Mr. Hale, are you willing to testify as well? Not just about the fraud, about the inquest. About what actually happened on that mountain in 1876. The room was very quiet. Gideon had thought about this moment, not anticipated it exactly, because he hadn't known the inquest would become part of this, hadn't known until Rose laid the documents on his table. But he'd thought in the abstract about what it would mean to say the true thing in a room full of people with authority to hear it. Not a mountain cabin, not a private conversation, a federal proceeding. He'd thought about 8 years. He'd thought about mornings. Yes, he said. Cross nodded once. Then we have work to do, he said. What followed was not fast, and it was not clean, and it was not the kind of resolution that happened in a single dramatic moment. It happened the way real things happened in stages, with setbacks, with the grinding procedural machinery of federal law moving at the speed it moved, regardless of how urgent the people inside it believed the situation to be. Carlyle's attorneys filed 3 motions to delay the investigation. 2 were denied. 1 was partially granted, which pushed the primary hearing back by 3 weeks. During those 3 weeks, Rose and Gideon stayed in Harwick. Cutter found them a room at the boarding house, separate rooms, which Elsa Bergen had thoughts about that she kept mostly to herself. And Cross established a temporary federal office in the building next to the sheriff's office, and began the process of formally interviewing every settler whose name appeared in the documents. Rose worked with Cross's office every day. Not as a witness waiting to testify, as a working resource, the person who knew the documents more thoroughly than anyone else in the territory, and who could answer questions about them faster and more precisely than the attorneys Cross had brought with him from Portland. On the fourth day, Cross came to her in the morning with a particular expression and a piece of paper. "Carlyle offered a settlement," he said. Rose looked at the paper. She looked at Cross. "To me personally," she said. "To you and to the 7 families who've already given testimony," he said. "Land restoration for 6 of the 14 properties and a payment of—" He named a number. Rose set the paper down. "No," she said. Cross looked at her. "Miss Bennett," he said. "The number is substantial, and a settlement would mean 6 of 14 properties," she said. "What happens to the other 8? "The settlement doesn't address those," he said. "Then it's not a settlement," she said. "It's a partial admission designed to make the full investigation go away." She looked at him. "What happens to Carlyle and Voss, and the surveyors who filed falsified records, and the officials who took payments?" "The settlement addresses their liability." Cross was quiet. "It would include immunity provisions," he said. "No," Rose said again. "Flat. Absolute. No space around it." Cross looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. He picked up the paper. He wrote one word across the bottom of it. He sent it back. Ute. The twist that nobody had seen coming arrived on day 9. Gideon was in Cross's office going through his own testimony preparation when Cross's deputy came in with a telegraph message and a look on his face that was doing something complicated. Cross read it. He read it again. He handed it to Gideon. It was from the territorial capital, not from Carlyle's attorneys, from the territorial governor's office. It stated that in light of the federal investigation currently underway, the governor was ordering a formal review of 12 land dispute cases decided in the territory between 1879 and 1883, including listed third, the inquest verdict in the matter of Ethan Gideon Hale Mountain Guide, 1876. Gideon read it twice. He set it down. He looked at the far wall. "The governor moved first," he said, "before Carlyle's people could reach him," Cross said. "Which tells me someone in the governor's office has been watching this situation and decided that being on the right side of it before the federal proceedings concluded was better for their career than waiting to see which way it fell." "Political calculation," Gideon said. "Political calculation that happens to produce the right result," Cross said, "which is a kind of justice, even if it's not the kind poets write about." Gideon looked at the paper. "A formal review. 8 years. "What does that mean?" he said. "Practically." "It means the inquest verdict goes back in front of a panel," Cross said. "With the new evidence about Voss's relationship with Whitmore and Kane. It means—" He paused. "It means that if the panel finds what the documentary evidence suggests, they'll find the verdict is vacated. Your license is restored. The official record says what it should have said in 1876. Gideon sat with that. He sat with it for long enough that Cross, who was not a man given to unnecessary conversation, let him. 8 years. Not undone, you couldn't undo 8 years. But named, corrected, placed in the record correctly the way a survey was corrected when someone finally walked the actual ground instead of measuring from a ridge. "Tell me when the panel is scheduled," Gideon said. 3 weeks after the primary hearing," Cross said. "I'll be there," Gideon said. He stood up. He went to find Rose. She was in the boarding house with the documents, reorganizing them. Again, he noted, which was what she did when she was thinking through something she hadn't resolved yet. He came in and sat across from her. She looked at his face. "What happened?" she said. He told her about the telegraph. She read it. She set it down. She looked at him. And what crossed her face in that moment was something he hadn't seen there before. Not the careful control, or the forward-moving determination, or the dry precision she wore for the work. Something rawer than any of that. Something that was feeling something on his behalf, which was different from feeling something for yourself, and in some ways harder. "Gideon," she said. "I know," he said. 8 years, she said. I know, he said again. Are you... She stopped, started again. How are you? He looked at her. I'm angry, he said. And I'm grateful. And I'm... He stopped, considered. I'm glad I came down the mountain when I did, and not 3 years from now. Because 3 years from now, I'd have missed this. I'd have missed you. He said it simply. And that's the piece that matters most to me right now. Not the panel, not the license. You. Rose looked at him. She set down the document she'd been holding. She stood up. She crossed to his side of the table and sat in the chair next to him, not across next to close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. I'm going to say something, she said, and I need you to not make it into more than it is or less than it is. All right, he said. I've been thinking about what I said at the Bergen farm, she said. About home. And I've been thinking about whether I said it because I was exhausted and scared, and you were the person who'd been beside me for 4 days, and I was conflating proximity with Rose, he said. Let me finish, she said. He was quiet. I've been thinking about whether it was real, or whether it was the relief of someone who'd been alone for too long finally having someone next to her, she said. And the answer I keep coming back to is that both those things can be true, and the second one doesn't invalidate the first. She looked at him. It's real. I know it's real because it's the same thing I felt in your cabin when you turned your back to let me change out of the wet coat. And when you remembered the order of the documents, and when you stepped in front of me on the street. She paused. It's been real since before I knew it was. Gideon looked at her. I know, he said. You knew, she said. I knew, he said. Earlier than you'd probably like. She almost smiled. How much earlier? The ankle lacing, he said. When you tightened it yourself on the granite and stood up and didn't complain. He paused. I thought this is a person I want to know for a very long time. Rose looked at him. That's a very practical thing to fall in love over, she said. The word sat between them. Neither of them moved. Yes, he said. It is. She held his gaze. Good, she said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They sat like that in the boarding house room, with the documents on the table and the case 3 weeks from its conclusion, and 8 years of his life waiting to be corrected, and her name waiting to be cleared, and both of them knowing that the path between here and the mountain was still a real path that would require real walking. Neither of them moved for a long time. The hearing lasted 4 days. Rose testified for 6 hours across 2 sessions. Cross had prepared her thoroughly, and she had prepared herself more thoroughly than that, and the defense attorneys who had been sent to discredit her character and her motives found instead a woman who knew the documents better than they did, who could cite specific page numbers and column positions and date stamps from memory, who answered every attempt to rattle her with the same direct, precise calm that she brought to everything, and who, when one attorney suggested that her motives for copying the documents were personal rather than principled, looked at him and said, My motive was that 14 families lost their land to fraud, and I was the only person in a position to document it. If you're asking whether that felt personal, yes. It felt personal the way injustice feels personal to anyone paying attention. The courtroom was very quiet after that. Gideon testified for 3 hours. He told the true story of the Bitterroot Pass expedition in 1876 for the first time in an official proceeding. The weather warnings he'd given, the decisions the investors had made against his advice, what had actually happened on the rope. He told it the way he'd written it down alone on the mountain 8 years ago, with the specific remembered detail of someone who had been there and knew what they'd seen. He named Whitmore and Kane. He named Voss. He connected them to the documents. When the lead defense attorney tried to suggest that his account was self-interested, Gideon looked at him and said, I lived alone on a mountain for 8 years, rather than keep telling this story to people who wouldn't listen. The only thing that changed is that now there's documentation to confirm what I already knew. He paused. Self-interest would have been telling it sooner. The attorney moved on. Holt testified. The Drummonds. 5 other families whose names had been in Rose's documents, and who came to the federal proceeding and said in their own voices what had been done to them, and each voice added weight to the structure Rose had built and the structure held. Price authenticated the forgery methodology. Cutter attested to Voss's role in the Drummond dispute. Marsh testified about the instructions he'd overheard at the trail camp, including the phrase "dealt with," which the courtroom received with a specific quality of stillness. On the 4th day, the federal judge, a man named Harrington, who had the contained gravity-heavy manner of someone who had presided over serious matters long enough to understand exactly how serious they were, issued his preliminary findings. The Cascade Land and Property Company had committed systematic fraud. The evidence was conclusive. A full federal investigation was ordered immediately. Carlisle and 3 named associates were remanded pending trial. Voss was suspended from his official position pending his own separate proceeding. All 14 land cases were referred for review and restoration. All 14. The courtroom received that in a way that was not dramatic. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that happened when something people had been carrying for a long time was set down, and the setting down was real, and they were still adjusting to the weight being gone. Joseph Holt, sitting in the 3rd row, put his face in his hands. Gideon watched him. He looked at Rose beside him. She was watching Holt too, with an expression that was precise and controlled, and not hiding in that moment how much it mattered to her, how much of what she'd done and lost and carried for 3 months had been for that specific moment, a man putting his face in his hands because something wrong had been made right. She felt Gideon looking at her. She turned. "It's done," he said quietly. "It's done," she said. She took his hand. He held on. 3 weeks later, the panel reviewing the 1876 inquest convened for half a day and vacated the verdict in the matter of Ethan Gideon Hale. The official record was corrected. His guide license was restored. The panel's written finding stated without equivocation that the original verdict had been reached on the basis of testimony subsequently proven to have been coordinated by parties with a financial interest in its outcome, and that the preponderance of evidence supported the account given by Mr. Hale in the original proceeding and consistently thereafter. 8 years of mornings on a mountain alone, knowing the true thing and carrying it. The panel didn't know about those mornings. The document didn't reference them. But Gideon read those 2 words consistently thereafter and sat with them for a moment in Cutter's office, where Cross had handed him the finding, and he let himself feel what they meant. Then he folded the document. He put it in his coat. He went to find Rose. She was waiting outside. She'd known the finding was coming today. She'd chosen to wait outside rather than in the room, which he understood she'd given him that moment. The reading of it without making it something she witnessed, and therefore made about her presence rather than his. He came out. She looked at his face. "Done," she said. "Done?" he said. She nodded once. Then she said, "When do we go home?" He looked at her. "Tomorrow," he said. "If you're ready." "I've been ready," she said. "For a while now." He looked at this woman who had walked into a ditch on his mountain and walked out of it and kept going. Who had carried 15 documents through 3 months of being alone and afraid, without becoming either broken or bitter. Who had sat across from him in a cabin at the top of the world and laid the truth on his table like she was handing him back something he hadn't known he'd lost. "The cabin needs work," he said. "I know," she said. "I made a list." He stared at her. "You made a list," he said. "The 2nd week," she said. "When I was reorganizing your supplies, I noticed several things that needed attention, and I wrote them down." She looked at him. "The roof on the north side, the window frame on the east, the storage situation in general." "The storage situation in general," he repeated. "It's not a criticism," she said. "It's a list." He looked at her. He put his hands on either side of her face. He kissed her. She kissed him back. When they stopped, she looked at him with those direct river-dark eyes and said, "The roof first, before winter. The roof first, he agreed. She took his hand. They walked back toward the boarding house to pack what little they had, and the mountain waited for them, the way mountains waited, without urgency, without impatience, solid and permanent, and exactly where it had always been. Spring came to the Bitterroot the way spring always came, slowly. At first, then all at once, the cold releasing its grip a degree at a time, until one morning you woke up, and the air had changed, and the world was doing something different. The cabin was warmer than it had been, not from different wood, or a better stove from different mornings. From the specific warmth of a place that had people in it who chose to be there, which was a different temperature than a place that simply sheltered whoever had nowhere else to go. The roof on the north side was fixed before the first snow. The window frame on the east was replaced in November. The storage situation was addressed in stages in the way of people who had other things to do and worked on one problem at a time and didn't rush what didn't need rushing. Rose received a letter from Commissioner Aldrich in December. It informed her that the federal investigation had expanded to encompass 6 additional land fraud cases in neighboring territories connected to Cascade's affiliated companies, that 41 families were in the process of having land restored to them, and that her original documentation had been instrumental in each subsequent case. He thanked her with the formal courtesy of official correspondence, and then added in handwriting at the bottom of the typed letter, "What you carried and how far you carried it mattered. I want you to know that." No. She read the letter twice. She put it in the satchel. She kept the satchel. Some things you kept not because you needed them anymore, but because of what they represented, the specific shape of a choice you'd made when the choice was hard-held in physical form, so you could look at it and know it had been real. Gideon's guide license arrived in January. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put it on the shelf where he could see it from the table. He didn't go back to guiding right away. There was land to tend, and a woman who had reorganized his supply system in ways that required him to learn where everything now was, which took longer than he expected, and which Rose found genuinely funny. But come spring, when a settler family 3 valleys over sent word that they needed someone who knew the Bitterroot passes to show them a safe route to the northern grazing land, Gideon said yes. He came home that evening. Rose had made food. She looked at him when he came in at his face, which was doing something it didn't always do. "Good," she said. "Good," he said. She nodded. He sat at the table. She sat across from him. Outside, the spring evening was coming in slowly, the way spring evenings in the mountains did, with the specific quality of light that made everything look like it had just been made. "I've been thinking," Rose said. "About what?" he said. "About the families," she said. "The ones who had land restored. Most of them are starting over. Some of them need to understand how to read a survey, how to verify their own boundaries, how to recognize when official documentation might not be what it claims to be." She looked at him. "There's no one teaching that. There should be." He looked at her. "You want to teach it," he said. "I want to build something that teaches it," she said. "Not just me. A resource. Something that stays after I've moved on from explaining it individually." "You've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "Since Harwick," she said. "Maybe before." He looked at her and the woman across his table who had arrived with nothing and had turned out to be, among all the things, she was someone who saw a problem that existed after the immediate crisis and started working on it before anyone asked her to. "What do you need?" he said. "Time," she said, "and someone who knows the territory and the people in it and can help me understand which families need it most." "I know the territory," he said. "I know you do," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. "All right," he said. She smiled, the real one, full and present, the one that had taken him completely by surprise the first time he'd seen it in a boarding house in Harwick, and which still every time was precisely that, a surprise. The specific kind of surprise that happened when something you were grateful for refused to become ordinary. Outside, the Bitterroot held everything. It had always held the trails he'd walked for 8 years alone, the granite passes that had given him cover when he'd needed it, The creek that ran through the lower valley. The cabin that had been a place of waiting and was now a place of living. Home was not the mountain. Home was not the cabin. Home was the person across the table who had walked into his life on a broken ankle in a rainstorm and had stayed not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this was where she chose to be. And home was the man who had opened his door to a stranger and found on the other side of it the thing he'd stopped believing was still possible. Two people who had each had nothing left. Who had found everything in exactly the same place at exactly the same time because one of them had not kept walking when the other one was face down in the mud. That was enough. That was all of it. That was home.